So I'm going to take a break from this debate and go back to what, Frank, you were talking about earlier, the web. Again, as a historian, I'm always fascinated by the way technology is introduced. When television was introduced, it was regarded, it was going to be the panacea to save our democracy, because people believed that party bosses were strangling our democracy, and now television was going to give you a front row seat at the political conventions, so you wouldn't have to listen to the party bosses. You could actually watch the conventions and make up your own mind about politics. We saw how well that all worked out. The party conventions wound up turning into entertainment showcases, no different than a quiz show, and not much was learned. Then 30, 40 years go by, the internet surfaces, the World Wide Web. And again, you saw all these books coming out and saying, here was going to be a panacea for American democracy. It's going to solve the problem of politics by 30-second sound bites and 30-second commercials, and boy, this is going to be great. And then, of course, we have a few years' experience. We say, oh, okay, well, maybe this isn't such a hot experiment after all. But I want to tell you, it can be put to good uses. Just like television can be put to good uses, so can the internet be put to good uses. Now, you were talking about leaving this room and going to the internet and learning all about the Constitution. Here's the problem. Where do you go? We are drowning in information on the internet. It is hard to find good, useful information. Now, I'm going to make a shameless pitch for myself, because since my book came out on this whole problem of ignorance, I've been working for a company that's trying to do something about this. It's called Vote IQ, and you go on there, and we have a team of researchers who focus on, in part, this is just one of the many things we're doing, hot topics. So, for instance, if you land on the site now and you go to hot topics, you'll see the deficit. And we there give you all the basic information that you need to know to understand that topic. We tell you, here are the basic facts everybody agrees on. Here are the facts the left makes claims about. Here are the facts the right makes claims about. Here are the arguments the Democrats are making with the responses of the Republicans to each of those arguments, and vice versa. Now, for 10 years, I've been a journalist as well as a historian. I have wanted somebody to do this. Nobody was doing it, so I finally worked it with some other people, and we've been working really hard the last few years to bring this about. This is a great resource you can use so that you can learn what the parameters of the debate are. If you only go to the sites that reinforce your own views, then you're always going to be getting just a skewed view of that subject.
I have made a suggestion to the people who run the high-tech industry and who are in charge, in essence, of delivering the internet to us, that they, let's say, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and those types, and the educators like Diane Ravitch and Howard Gardner and Ellen Haas, all get together and form a work group that would eventually deliver a standardized methodology of research on the internet, so that all teachers and all business could rely on how people were using this internet. It would not include censorship. It would be an organization that, like many others, got together not as competitors, but to establish a credible ability to use this incredible mutant power source in history to its maximum efficiency. It's not meant to be pro-left or pro-right. It is, how can we control it as opposed to it controlling us? I was at an internet conference in England, sitting next to the man who was a hero in Eastern Europe for inventing blogs. And at a certain point, a Dutch journalist stood up, turned to this man and said, "Could you tell us your day job, please?" And he turned puce, and he was forced to admit that he was a senior executive at Microsoft. And it was not the Chinese government or the French government, it was Bill Gates that was trying to shape our use of the internet. I say, fine, let Bill Gates, along with his competitors, Steve Jobs, along with the informed, educated experts of the country, take this powerful thing that no one could anticipate and design our usage for it and give it back to us so that we're not censored away from it and it's not trivialized, because if the experts don't do it, nations will. And there are no nations who will agree to any other nation's version of how to use the internet, and we'll have chaos. And so in order to use it well, let's standardize a methodology of how to use it. And that way, we can maximize it, maximize ourselves. And that way, you can raise all boats. The whole notion of education is to make us smarter on Thursday than we are on Monday. It's to make our children smarter than we are. And the internet is capable of enormous knowledge and perhaps even getting us close to the doorway to wisdom. But it can't happen if local interests, if special interests interfere and block your usage of this incredible tool. No one gains in the long run through our citizenry being ignorant. Everyone must understand that being a good citizen, as Frank said, being a good citizen is harder than being a doctor, a lawyer, a pilot, a teacher. A good citizen, someone who accepts political activity in your bone structure, in your daily life, that has values that are political, whether they be left or right, and understand that the gift America has given to the world is that kind of active citizenship. That's something that we are giving up now by the handful. When I first met the Admiral, I asked him, do you want a stupid voluntary military force? Is that an advantage on any battlefield? And he immediately said, no, sir, I don't. Well, I guess this whole idea of our talking together is to raise up in you the enthusiasm to keep talking and find out more, and to find out how much you have, how much power you have, and how much power you could have. The biggest clue to how much power you have is how much money, time, and creativity goes into distracting you from that power. We are a country of distraction.
Speak at this end.
Don't think too much about how much power we really have.
Right. Governor Romer, you've been patient.
There's something on the agenda of America right now that will have a lot to do with this. And ultimately, the quality of citizenship is based upon our intelligence, our ability to reason and to deal with fact and alternatives. Now, the American educational system is going to be hit because the states and the local governments are really going into a period of time that is unprecedented in terms of budget cutbacks. And how we handle that in relationship to continuing educational quality is critical to this whole debate. We are falling behind the world in our comparative merit of educating our children, and we can fall behind further if we drastically strip the system in our budget crisis. So, there's an agenda item in every state and every community. I know you got to cut back. Be very careful the harm you can do to fundamental education of citizens.
All right, thank you. We've got about 30 minutes left before Richard's closing remarks, and what I'd like to do is shift from discussing the crisis and the problem to looking at are there glimmers of hopes, are there green shoots out there? And so we have an order, and John Fund actually is the lead off for the discussion on what's the road back from the...
Well, picking up on Governor Romer's comments, I agree education is a key element of this. I disagree that the experience of the last 30 or 40 years has taught us that money is the major component. We are spending more, even after inflation, than ever before on education, on public education. And the number is bigger than the Defense Department, I assure you. And we have to recognize that the link that we thought existed between spending more money on education and achievement and results isn't nearly as clear as we thought it was. I mean, KIPP schools, charter schools, many Catholic schools, Unitarian schools do a very good job of teaching people for far less. And they often don't have the capital budget that is allocated to public schools. So I think we know some of the elements that go into making a good school. And I think one of the most exciting things we've seen in the last few months is we are finally achieving a rough consensus between left and right that our children are so important we cannot wait for reform. This is not a left or right issue. It's about more schools that can involve parents more, schools that have a better structure, schools that have more autonomy, schools that have fewer rules, schools that don't necessarily tie themselves to teacher tenure. No other occupation in America has tenure, lifetime employment with almost no chance of losing your job. I think if we can move to that, and movies like Waiting for Superman, which was done by the documentary Mr. Guggenheim, filmmaker who did Al Gore's film, and The Lottery, these kind of films and the kind of reforms that Governor Romer tried, and in some cases succeeded, in implementing in Los Angeles, are showing us the way that, yes, we're going to have to invest in education. It's going to involve money. But there are some basic reforms that people of goodwill on the left and right can agree on that don't involve money that will improve educational outcomes.
Super. Frank, you're the next one. What are some of the steps we can take back from the break?
I'd like to focus on quality communication. I got to ask you a question. The woman who cheered Diane Ravitch, was that you who hissed when John Funn mentioned Catholic schools and... So here's my point to you all. You all have been raised. She felt it on herself that she wanted to make as much of a verbal statement as possible. When one person does it, John was able to move on because he's not here. I've been to so many college campuses when there'll be 5 people like her who actually try to disrupt so that students can't hear. And I think that is one of the great tragedies of our college campuses. We talk about diversity in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of income. But so rarely did I hear about diversity in terms of point of view. And I know that there are so many kids who are so interested, whether they agree or disagree, they come to a function to learn. And what they end up seeing at a graduation speech is 15 or 20 kids interrupting it for the thousands of kids that are curious to know what this person has to say, and what a tragedy that is. So if I can give you advice, what I just did with her is a teaching moment, because nobody taught her the decorum, to at least be respectful. She can disagree with him, and I'll even give you his email. But it's different than interrupting a panel. First thing is, the first sentence that you say is actually more important than the last, because they decide in the first sentence whether what you have to say is relevant and whether they listen. You always prepare your last. Don't. Second is, and I always try to be careful, and I'm waiting for you to put your sign up, is that the shorter you make your point, the more effective it is. And in politics, you're often rewarded by going on, and then you bring 3, 4, or 5 different points. You make it quickly, people remember it. Third is that you speak and you enumerate, which is what I'm doing right here, first, second, third, because you can actually follow the points rather than making it one big mush. Fourth is to humanize, personalize, and individualize it so that people see themselves in your communication and they can then apply it to the people around them. And fifth, it's got to be credible. And it's got to mean something. So in essence, you're trying to make an impact on them that they will remember for as long, whether it's a joke or a tragic story. And I think that the communication will lead to better citizenship, will lead to greater civility. If we learn how to talk to each other, and I'll make it in 30 seconds, and you owe me, by the way, dinner. Well, I'll tell you why after the cameras go off. If you teach students how to listen, that's actually going to teach them how to communicate.